En 1941, les États-Unis s'engagent dans la Seconde Guerre mondiale. La Sicile devient un enjeu majeur pour les forces alliées pour combattre le nazisme. Par sa situation au cœur de la Méditerranée, l'île italienne est une porte d'entrée idéale pour la reconquête de l'Europe. Et sur place, les Alliés doivent composer avec un phénomène dont ils avaient sous-estimé l'ampleur. Une organisation souterraine, séculaire, et dont la participation va se révéler déterminante pour la suite des opérations.
Gli americani, durante lo sbarco in Sicilia, non hanno una reale coscienza né conoscenza di quello che era il fenomeno mafioso locale.
Voilà, une société secrète existant depuis des siècles et dirigeant la société par en dessous de manière secrète, par la corruption, d'abord par l'assassinat quand il le faut, mais surtout par leur arme principale qui est l'intimidation.
Alla fine degli anni 20 Mussolini fa un viaggio in Sicilia e un signore si avvicinò a lui e disse Duce, non era il caso che tutta questa forza pubblica ce lo accompagnasse in questo viaggio, perché a proteggerla in Sicilia siamo noi. Al che accese in Mussolini, ma chi siamo noi chi? Si chiese. E il sindaco di allora, appunto, di Piano della Prese era uno che apparteneva alla mafia.
The grandeur that was Rome, debased, mocked, to make an Axis holiday. After 2 decades of dictatorship, Mussolini's regime still retains its outward flamboyance and flashes a gaudy front to the world.
That so infuriated Mussolini that he began the first crackdown, the first campaign to eliminate the mafia in Sicily, and he did a very good job.
Cesare More was the weapon that Mussolini used to deal with the mafia. He was called the Beast because he was very ruthless with the mafia, and he would have mass roundups where he would take mafia and people linked with the mafia and put them all in jail.
Sous l'action du préfet Mori, qui prend ses fonctions en 1924, la mafia en Sicile n'est plus que l'ombre d'elle-même. Le fascisme triomphe, de nombreux mafieux fuient sous la répression aux États-Unis, où une nouvelle mafia se forme, en particulier à New York.
There were 5 mafia families based in New York in the 1930s, and they had grown very rich, very strong. Lucky Luciano was a top gangster.
Salvatore Lucania, che poi prenderà il nome di Lucky Luciano, e a New York lui diventerà il capo assoluto della mafia americana.
It really turned the mafia from a rather old school gangster organization into a very modern crime syndicate.
Lucky Luciano, dans le collimateur des autorités, est arrêté et condamné en 1936. Il doit passer 25 années en prison. Pourtant, quelques années plus tard, en 1942, le naufrage du Normandie dans le port de New York va remettre en selle le chef mafieux.
During her conversion into a troop transport, fire breaks out in the 83,000-ton liner Normandy, recently renamed Lafayette. Investigators established, apparently beyond all doubt, that the sparks which started the fire came from an acetylene blow lamp, which was being used close to bales of inflammable material. Although all suggestions of sabotage have been officially discounted, the whole business sounds mighty strange.
The fear was that we need to protect New York, the port, the whole of the East Coast. So the naval commander, Huffington, got in touch with Lucky Luciano in jail, and they struck a deal. Basically, Luciano said, I can help the US Navy to protect the ports. Come 1943, and the United States wants to invade Sicily, they thought, let's get the mafia to actually help us with that.
The invasion of Sicily. In these pictures you will see the naval side of the great Allied operation. This was just part of the biggest invasion armada in history, plowing its way across the Mediterranean. An armada made up of scores of different classes of vessels, totaling over 2,000 ships in all. Transports, landing craft, escort cruisers, destroyers, small vessels, all of them protected by a strong force of battleships and aircraft carriers.
L'operazione Husky è il nome in codice che viene data ad una delle più imponenti operazioni militari della Seconda Guerra mondiale, lo sbarco anglo-americano in Sicilia dell'estate del 1943.
So word went out to lots of the mafia and Italians based in New York who sent in photographs and maps of the coast of Sicily so they could get as much information as they could so they could plan their invasion.
Derrière cette collaboration avérée des Siciliens au débarquement, se construit un mythe aujourd'hui encore contesté, celui de l'intervention de Lucky Luciano pour que le capo mafioso Calogero Vizzini apporte son soutien aux Alliés.
Per leggenda o per verità, qualche giorno prima sulle campagne di questo paesino, che poi era Villalba, il paese di Don Calogero Vizzini, questo paesino venne sorvolato da un aereo.
This aircraft was flown over a little town where the mayor was instructed because a flag was dropped from the aircraft and it had a big L.
La L stava per Luciano, per Lucky, e questo fazzoletto era il segnale della apertura, della collaborazione e quindi della benedizione, tra virgolette, che Lucky Luciano dava ai mafiosi siciliani di poter collaborare con le truppe anglo-americane.
American troops of General Patton's 7th Army move swiftly through western Sicily, taking town after town as they drive to join General Montgomery's British 8th Army. Through captured Tramini, Marsala, Trapani, Palermo, scenes are the same.
Lucky Luciano non è stato certamente determinante né lui, né la mafia, né i personaggi mafiosi per lo sbarco anglo-americano in Sicilia. Mafia o non mafia, si sarebbe comunque fatto.
L'invasion de la Sicile porte un coup fatal au fascisme. Le 3 septembre 1943, un armistice est signé en secret avec le royaume d'Italie qui rejoint les forces alliées. La Sicile est maintenant une base avancée pour libérer le reste de l'Europe.
From Washington, President Roosevelt says,
An armistice with Italy has been concluded. The Italian people are at last coming to the day of liberation from their real enemies, the Nazis. But let us not delude ourselves that this armistice means the end of war in the Mediterranean. We must drive the Germans out of Italy as we have driven them out of Tunisia and Sicily.
In quel momento l'unica necessità pregnante, immediata degli americani era quello di controllare la popolazione civile, controllare un territorio occupato.
A proclamation posted by the Allied military government in Marsala, Sicily, informs the population of the terms of occupation. Allied troops cooperate with local officials in establishing and maintaining order. Civilians are required to surrender all firearms.
Da questo punto di vista nasce l'AMGOT, l'amministrazione alleata dei territori occupati, e con l'intento di fornire assistenza alla popolazione civile, dare delle regole sul comportamento della gente.
In a secret report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, published in April 1943, paragraph here which says we must establish contact and communications with clandestine radical groups, e.g. the mafia.
Vengono a trovare in Sicilia con personaggi col berretto, come dire, storto, come si dice da noi, che contavano per quello che erano. Questa grande capacità di incutere terrore perché ammazzavano, perché erano dei delinquenti. E quindi probabilmente c'è una sottovalutazione anche della pericolosità del fenomeno mafioso.
They very sensibly kept the Carabinieri, the police force, in power, but they had to get rid of all the fascists who had been running the towns. And the most authoritative local people tended to be the mafia.
They were looking for new leadership to replace the fascists. And of course, who were the people serving in prison who people thought were named dons? They thought they were important. They were mafiosi. So they, in effect, took the mafiosi out of prison and put them in control.
Amgot removes from office a fascist mayor. Being pro-Nazi and one of those who tried to grab the town relief funds for himself, Giorgio Melli found himself in custody. Then came the installation of a new mayor. Amgot picked on Mario da Crosta, a prominent contractor who was sworn into office. This is he taking the oath.
Intanto nomina Calogero Vizzini, mafioso di Villalba, sindaco appunto del suo comune.
Don Carlo was one of these mafia who got their power back and saw this as his chance to make some money and also to get back in power.
Il curriculum diciamo mafioso di Don Calogero Vizzini era conosciutissimo, ma chi l'ha letto dell'Amgot? E quanti l'hanno letto con attenzione? O quanti hanno chiesto di leggerlo? Forse nessuno.
And what the mafia did during that period was they took over the black market, trading goods that people couldn't normally get, and he would frequently steal them from the US Army and sell them on. And Don Carlo got very powerful.
Les Américains avaient-ils conscience de ce qu'ils faisaient en nommant Don Carlo maire? L'homme en charge de ces nominations, c'est Charles Poletti, ancien gouverneur de New York, maintenant en charge des affaires civiles. Lui aussi, une figure très contestée.
Colonel Poletti, and he was a very senior commander. He was based in Sicily, and then he went on to Naples. And the feeling is, and you hear more and more accounts, that actually he was too close to the mafia. And particularly when he was out in Naples, fingers pointed him being very closely tied in with Vito Genovese, who was running the black market there.
Now, Vito Genovese was a lieutenant and one of the top leaders in Lucky Luciano's group. He was worried about an indictment for murder. He fled the US and went to Italy. And what he did was he made a deal with corrupt American officers. They stole supplies from the American canteens, from the American depots, and they sold it on the underground.
Their food confiscated by the Nazis, civilians receive emergency rations of bread dough until everybody is fed. Reliable citizens often serve as civil police.
La popolazione civile aveva il cibo razionato, aveva il pane razionato, tutto era razionato. Quindi la popolazione civile era il soggetto che più soffriva. I soldi non contavano niente, non contavano più niente, l'inflazione era arrivata alle stelle.
One story goes that there was a Sergeant Dickey who wanted to stop Vito Genovese, wanted to put him in jail, but he needed some senior commander to sign off on this, and Paletti wouldn't see him. He just didn't want to get involved.
Conscient de la montée du marché noir et de la corruption, Lamgotte charge le général Scotton de rédiger un rapport sur les activités de la mafia en Sicile. Les États-Unis ont-ils fait fausse route avec la mafia jusqu'ici? Quelle marche à suivre à présent?
È un documento importantissimo, forse l'unico documento che pone in risalto il vero, reale problema, quello del grande potere che il governo degli Stati Uniti stava dando a questi mafiosi.
The Americans and Lord Reynolds, who was in charge of the entire island, suddenly realised that maybe they'd made a mistake and that the mafia was setting up their old rackets.
Lui pone tre linee di massime soluzioni. Cioè noi bisogna o li eliminiamo tutti, noi siamo più forti, o entriamo a patti con questo sistema per cui io do una cosa a te, tu mi dai una cosa a me, oppure non facciamo niente, che è un po' quello che alla fine sceglieranno di fare, questo sapere e non sapere.
The Americans didn't understand the Sicilian frame of mind, the Sicilian history, so they just were ignorant, they didn't really care. All the Americans were concerned with was winning the war and getting home.
In from the coast and up from the south, the Allied armies stream together, forming a swelling, flowing tide whose billows are lashed by victory. The march begins, the march to Rome.
The whole scene changed when the Americans and British left. The Italian government was back in charge. Then Don Carlo played a very clever game. He could see this was a golden chance for Sicily to become an independent country. And Don Carlo Vizzini was one of the key mafia figures to back the separatist movement.
Le soutien du mouvement indépendantiste qui émerge après le départ des Américains est une nouvelle opportunité pour la mafia d'asseoir son pouvoir. Salvatore Giuliano, bandit sicilien, est nommé colonel de l'EVIS, le bras armé du mouvement, qui l'utilise pour faire régner la terreur.
Prefettura di Palermo, quartier generale della guerra contro Giuliano. La polizia se ne sta allerta, reparti di carabinieri la rinforzano. Da un momento all'altro può giungere una staffetta, un informatore con la notizia «C'è Giuliano». Ecco la strada dei grandi appostamenti. 900 uomini tra polizia e carabinieri. Ma Montelepre ha difeso ancora una volta il segreto di Giuliano. Al suo posto il bandito ha lasciato qualche seguace. Il cerchio si è stretto. Mani in alto! Ma Giuliano non c'è più. Dov'è Giuliano?
È un movimento che guarda la Sicilia come possibile ulteriore stato degli Stati Uniti.
Alors, dissipons une légende. Les mafieux ne veulent absolument pas du pouvoir. Ils veulent l'influencer. Ils n'ont aucune espèce d'ambition politique. Que les gens soient indépendantistes siciliens, monarchistes modérés, démocrates chrétiens, socialistes ou quoi que ce soit, ils s'en moquent éperdument. Ils n'ont aucune vision des choses politiques. Ils considèrent tout ça avec un profond mépris. Ce qu'ils veulent, c'est faciliter leur business et faciliter leurs affaires.
In 1946, they had an election, And the separatists lost really badly. So that looked as though that was the end of the game for the Don Carlo and for the mafia. But actually, then something else happened, which was the rise of the communists.
The American government, when it pulled out of Italy after the war, had no concern about the kind of government. All they thought was we had liberated Sicily, we had liberated Italy. It was now their problem, not ours. The only thing the Americans cared about after the war was that it wouldn't be communist.
Un rideau de fer s'est abattu sur le continent, déclare Churchill en 1946. En 1947, c'est Truman qui s'adresse au Congrès américain pour officialiser la lutte contre l'ennemi soviétique. L'objectif est clair, endiguer la progression du communisme en Europe. Et à nouveau, la Sicile est un enjeu majeur dans ce face-à-face.
That was when the Americans thought, yes, the mafia could be useful. They could defeat the communists, because they're the only ones with the violence and the power to do that. And so you have this very nasty virtual civil war when you have Don Carlo, Vizzini, the head of the mafia, backing bandits, literally shooting communists dead in the street, massacring them.
Il capitano Ragusa, che comandava allora i carabinieri di Piana, dispone i suoi uomini nelle probabili posizioni di agguato. Gli assassini erano 11. Dietro di loro il sentiero di fuga verso Palermo. 9 gli uccisi, più di 100 i feriti.
I momenti più drammatici di questa circostanza fu appunto la strage di Portella delle Ginestre del 1947, dove morirono 11 contadini, e lì c'è la mano di Salvatore Giuliano, ma ci sono anche tantissimi dubbi, tantissimi ancora quesiti aperti sulla partecipazione o meno addirittura di agenti segreti americani.
The Americans, the CIA, were happy for the mafia to fight the communists. And by 1947, it seemed to work because the mafia, the Salvatore's bandits, they had fought the communists. And then in that election, the Christian Democrats, the right-wing Christian Democrats, got into power, and that brought an end to the danger of communism in Sicily.
Bisogna rinunziare alla dottrina e alla pratica della violenza personale, della sopraffazione di parte. Bisogna credere ed accettare totalmente e sinceramente che le questioni di governo e di Stato si risolvono col voto e che questo voto fa legge per tutti, salvi naturalmente i principi supremi della morale.
And one of the reasons the Italian mafia in Sicily was so strong was because the Christian Democrats needed them. They controlled much of the voting and elections in Sicily. So for 30 to 40 years, the Christian Democrats had this unholy alliance with the mafia in Sicily, because the mafia controlled the vote, and this way indirectly controlled the government in Rome. So the American government was very content as long as there was a Christian Democratic pro-American government in control. And they didn't care whether or not the mafia in Sicily was aiding them. It was immaterial to the Americans.
Quali sono state le conseguenze di questa eventuale collaborazione con gli esponenti mafiosi? La legittimazione che danno a questi personaggi servirà proprio a loro per successivamente presentarsi politicamente nelle file della democrazia cristiana.
When you're looking back now on that period, you could say that the Americans certainly allowed the mafia to get back in charge with the Christian Democrat Party.
On peut affaiblir la mafia, on ne peut pas la détruire. C'est comme les graines dans le désert, vous savez. elles sont sèches, elles sont enquistées, et puis il pleut une fois toutes les 20 ans, hop, il y a les fleurs qui sortent. Voilà.
And it led to unparalleled success again for the next 40 or 50 years of the Italian or the Sicilian mafiosi.